American alien cowboy took in a cook, just for meals, but found the one thing he needed most, her heart. The lightning struck without warning on a clear September evening in 1889, illuminating the Montana Territory's sky with an otherworldly blue-white brilliance that made every horse within 10 miles rear and whinny in terror. But what made the cowhands at the Broken Star Ranch stop their evening poker game and step outside wasn't the impossible lightning from cloudless skies. It was the way their boss, Caleb Stone, stood completely motionless in the middle of the corral, his arms raised toward the heavens as if he were conducting the very storm itself. The electrical discharge seemed to flow through him like water through a riverbed, his tall frame silhouetted against the supernatural light, while sparks danced across his weather-beaten hat and down the length of his duster coat. For 30 seconds that felt like eternity. Caleb Stone stood there absorbing energy that should have killed any mortal man, while his startled ranch hands watched from the safety of the bunkhouse porch, crossing themselves and whispering prayers to whatever gods might protect them from witnessing things that human minds weren't meant to understand. When the phenomenon finally ended and normal darkness returned to the range, Caleb lowered his arms and turned toward the bunkhouse as if nothing unusual had occurred. His pale gray eyes held their usual calm intensity, and his voice carried its familiar gravelly authority when he called out that there was nothing to worry about, just a bit of strange weather that sometimes happened in these parts. But every man present noticed that he seemed somehow more vital than before, as if the lightning had recharged something essential within him rather than threatened his life. Old Pete Harker, who had worked cattle drives from Texas to Canada and seen more of the frontier's mysteries than any man should have to witness, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust and muttered that in 40 years of cowboy life, he had never seen lightning behave that way, and he had certainly never seen any man stand calm and unharmed while electricity danced around him like tame house cats seeking attention. The younger hands exchanged nervous glances but said nothing, having learned over the past 2 years that their boss was unlike any ranch owner in the territory, and that asking too many questions about his unusual habits was a good way to find yourself looking for work elsewhere. Caleb Stone paid top wages, provided better food and accommodations than most operations, and never asked his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself, but he maintained a distance and privacy that discouraged casual familiarity. What none of them could have known was that the lightning they had witnessed was not a natural phenomenon at all, but a carefully directed energy transfer from a monitoring station hidden in the mountains 60 miles away, where other beings like Caleb maintained watch over human activities in the region. The energy boost was necessary to maintain the biological systems that allowed him to pass for human, while operating the technology that kept his ranch running with suspicious efficiency. Caleb Stone was not his real name, of course, any more than his human appearance was his natural form. He was what his people called a deep cover operative, assigned to live among humans for extended periods to study their social development and report on their progress toward technological advancement that might pose threats to other civilizations. His assignment to the American frontier had lasted 15 years now, longer than any previous field operative had ever spent among a developing species. The ranch itself served as both his cover identity and his means of studying human behavior in one of their most challenging environments. Frontier life stripped away many of the social pretenses that obscured human nature in more civilized settings, revealing the core characteristics that drove their species toward both remarkable achievements and terrible destructiveness. Caleb had witnessed courage and cowardice, generosity and greed, wisdom and foolishness, all played out against the backdrop of humanity's expansion across their continent. But as he walked from the corral toward the ranch house that had been his home for over a decade, Caleb carried with him a growing dissatisfaction that the energy transfer had done nothing to alleviate. His reports to his superiors had become increasingly difficult to write, not because he lacked observations about human behavior, but because his observations were becoming colored by something his people did not experience and therefore could not understand: loneliness. The ranch house was large and comfortable, built to accommodate a family that Caleb had never had and never would have under the terms of his assignment. The empty rooms echoed with his footsteps, and the silence that had once provided peaceful solitude for reflection and report writing had become oppressive. He had spent 15 years observing human connections, their marriages, friendships, and community bonds, without ever allowing himself to form such attachments, and the isolation was beginning to affect his mental stability in ways that concerned him. His most recent communication from headquarters had carried subtle but unmistakable warnings about the psychological dangers of extended deep cover assignments. Other operatives had been recalled after showing signs of what the medical staff termed cultural integration syndrome, the gradual adoption of observed species' emotional patterns and social needs. Caleb's superiors were beginning to suspect that his lengthy reports and request for extended assignment indicated dangerous levels of attachment to his human subjects. The truth was more complex than his superiors could understand. Caleb had indeed developed attachments to the human community around him, but they were not the simple emotional bonds that his people feared would compromise his objectivity. Instead, he had come to appreciate the intricate web of relationships that gave meaning to human existence, and he had begun to understand that his own people's emotional detachment, while useful for scientific observation, left them impoverished in ways that their advanced civilization could not compensate for. These philosophical concerns occupied his thoughts as he prepared his evening meal in the ranch house kitchen, going through the mechanical process of cooking simple fare that provided nutrition without pleasure. He had learned to prepare human food competently enough to avoid suspicion, but eating remained a purely functional activity that held none of the social significance it carried for the people he studied. That was about to change in ways he could never have anticipated. The next morning brought visitors to the Broken Star Ranch, a family traveling west toward California, whose wagon had broken down on the road about 5 miles from Caleb's property. The father, a weathered man named Thomas Mitchell, approached the ranch house with the careful politeness of someone who needed help but didn't want to appear desperate. His story was familiar to anyone who had spent time on the frontier. Dreams of a better life in California, savings invested in supplies and equipment, and now mechanical failure that threatened to strand them far from their destination with winter approaching. Caleb listened to the man's request for assistance with the detached courtesy he had cultivated over years of frontier life, agreeing to send one of his hands with tools and expertise to help repair the wagon. But his attention was drawn away from Thomas Mitchell's grateful thanks by the sight of a young woman standing beside the disabled wagon, directing the unloading of supplies with efficient competence, while simultaneously caring for 2 small children who were clearly not her own. Even from a distance, there was something about her movements that suggested grace under pressure, intelligence applied to practical problems, and patience with the children that spoke to genuine kindness rather than mere duty. When she looked up and caught him observing her, her steady gaze met his without the fear or coquettish deflection that characterized most of his interactions with human women. Her assessment of him was direct and measuring, as if she were taking his measure as a potential ally or threat, with the same practical consideration she applied to her other responsibilities. Thomas Mitchell noticed the direction of Caleb's attention and seized the opportunity to address what had clearly become a pressing concern for their traveling party. His daughter-in-law Emma, he explained, was recently widowed and had been caring for his grandchildren since his son's death from fever 2 months ago. She was an excellent cook and housekeeper, experienced in frontier living, and he was hoping to find her employment somewhere along their route that would provide both income and a safe haven for herself and the children. The suggestion was clearly intended as much to solve Thomas Mitchell's problem. He couldn't afford to support Emma and the children indefinitely as to provide assistance to Caleb. But as Caleb studied the young woman more closely, he found himself intrigued by possibilities that went beyond simple charity. His ranch house had indeed been lacking the feminine organization that made frontier life more comfortable, and his own cooking skills, while adequate for survival, left much to be desired. More intriguingly, the presence of a housekeeper and cook would provide him with opportunities to observe human domestic relationships from a perspective he had never before experienced. Living in close proximity to a human woman would allow him to study the daily patterns of interaction, emotional expression, and social bonding that formed the foundation of their civilization's most basic unit, the family household. What he failed to anticipate was how much Emma Mitchell herself would complicate his carefully maintained emotional detachment. Emma approached their conversation with the same direct practicality she had shown in managing the wagon crisis. She was 26 years old, she told Caleb, had been married for 7 years before her husband's death, and had been managing households and cooking for large groups since she was 14. She could provide references from families they had worked for during their journey west, and she was willing to work for room and board plus modest wages if he would also provide for her 2 stepchildren. Her voice carried the flattened vowels of Kansas farming country, but her diction suggested education beyond the frontier norm. When Caleb asked about her background, she explained that she had been a school teacher before her marriage, and that she had always found satisfaction in creating comfortable homes and nourishing meals for people who appreciated the effort involved. The negotiation that followed was conducted with the kind of practical efficiency that Caleb had learned to appreciate during his years among humans. Emma's requirements were modest, but non-negotiable. Private quarters for herself and the children, Sundays free for rest and personal activities, and advance notice if her employment was to be terminated so she could make alternative arrangements. Caleb's requirements were equally straightforward: 3 meals a day prepared to his specifications, management of household cleaning and maintenance, and discretion regarding any unusual aspects of ranch operations she might observe. The last requirement was delivered with enough emphasis to make clear that his privacy was not merely a personal preference, but a matter of considerable importance. Emma's response to this warning revealed the intelligence and intuition that would prove to be both a complication and a source of unexpected satisfaction in their relationship. She told him that every man was entitled to his secrets as long as they didn't harm others, and that her experience as a frontier wife had taught her that asking fewer questions often led to more peaceful households. The arrangement they agreed upon seemed simple enough. Emma would serve as cook and housekeeper in exchange for wages, quarters, and security for herself and the children. But as her father-in-law prepared to continue his journey west, and Emma began settling into her new role at the Broken Star Ranch, neither she nor Caleb fully understood the complex dynamics they were setting in motion. Emma's first weeks at the ranch transformed the atmosphere of the place in ways that surprised everyone, including Caleb himself. The ranch house, which had functioned as little more than a place for him to sleep and conduct business, became a genuine home under her influence. Meals evolved from simple fuel for work into occasions that brought pleasure and satisfaction. The common areas took on warmth and organization that invited relaxation, rather than merely serving utilitarian purposes. But perhaps most remarkably, the presence of Emma and the children introduced something to ranch life that Caleb had not expected to find significant: the sound of human happiness. Emma's stepchildren, 7-year-old Johnny and 9-year-old Sarah, had been subdued and withdrawn during their difficult journey, but the security of the ranch environment allowed their natural spirits to emerge. Their laughter and chatter filled empty spaces that Caleb hadn't realized were oppressive in their silence. Emma herself proved to be far more complex and interesting than her practical demeanor had initially suggested. She possessed a quick wit and educated intelligence that made conversations with her genuinely engaging, something Caleb had not experienced during his years of maintaining careful distance from the humans around him. Her observations about ranch operations were often insightful, and her suggestions for improvements demonstrated an understanding of efficiency and organization that impressed even his experienced hands. More importantly, she seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of the emotional dynamics that governed successful human communities. She managed the children with firmness and affection that promoted both discipline and confidence. She interacted with the ranch hands in ways that were friendly without being inappropriate, earning their respect while maintaining proper boundaries. And she treated Caleb himself with a combination of deference and independence that suggested she saw him as worthy of respect without being intimidated by his authority. This last quality proved to be the most unsettling aspect of their relationship from Caleb's perspective. He had spent 15 years cultivating an image of aloof competence that discouraged personal involvement while maintaining the respect necessary for effective leadership. Emma acknowledged his authority without seeming impressed by it, followed his instructions without appearing subservient, and offered her own opinions without seeming presumptuous. The result was that Caleb found himself looking forward to their daily interactions with an anticipation that had nothing to do with scientific observation and everything to do with genuine enjoyment of her company. This development represented a serious breach of the emotional discipline that had allowed him to maintain his cover identity for so long, and he knew that his superiors would consider it evidence of the dangerous cultural integration they had warned him against. But despite his awareness of the risks involved, Caleb discovered that he was reluctant to take steps that would distance him from Emma or reduce their opportunities for interaction. Instead, he found himself creating excuses to spend time in the kitchen while she cooked, offering to help with tasks that brought them into closer proximity, and engaging in conversations that had nothing to do with ranch business and everything to do with the simple pleasure of hearing her thoughts and opinions. Emma, for her part, seemed to be experiencing her own complications regarding their relationship. She performed her duties with characteristic competence and efficiency, But Caleb noticed that she sometimes seemed to be studying him with the same careful attention he was giving to her. Her questions about his background became more frequent and more probing, though she was careful to respect the boundaries he had established regarding his privacy. The first real test of their developing relationship came when autumn weather brought early storms to the territory, trapping them all inside the ranch house for several days, while wind and snow made outdoor work impossible. The enforced proximity might have created tension or awkwardness, but instead it deepened their understanding of each other in ways that both found compelling and troubling. Emma revealed herself to be an excellent storyteller, entertaining the children and ranch hands with tales that ranged from frontier adventures to fairy stories that held lessons about courage and kindness. She was also a skilled musician, playing the small piano that had been gathering dust in the ranch house parlor and singing songs that filled the rooms with melody and warmth. Caleb found himself drawn into these domestic evenings in ways that violated every protocol of his assignment. He should have maintained professional distance, used the time for private communication with his superiors, or at minimum retreated to his office to work on reports that were already overdue. Instead, he sat with the others around the fireplace, listening to Emma's stories and music with an appreciation that had nothing to do with anthropological observation and everything to do with personal pleasure. It was during one of these evenings that Emma made an observation that revealed how much more she understood about him than he had realized. She mentioned, seemingly casually, that he seemed to know things about weather patterns, animal behavior, and mechanical systems that went far beyond normal ranch experience. Her tone was curious rather than suspicious, but her words made it clear that she had been paying close attention to aspects of his knowledge and abilities that he had thought were well concealed. Caleb's response required careful navigation between honesty and deception. He told her, truthfully, that he had traveled extensively before settling in Montana, and that his education had included subjects that most frontier residents never encountered. He implied without stating directly that his background was more cosmopolitan than was typical for ranch owners in the territory. Emma accepted this explanation with the same practical wisdom she brought to other aspects of their relationship, but Caleb could see that she was filing away details for future consideration. Her intelligence and observational skills were proving to be more acute than he had anticipated, and he realized that maintaining his cover would require even greater care than he had previously understood. The irony of the situation was not lost on him. He had spent years studying human behavior and relationships from a position of detachment, but now found himself the subject of equally careful observation by a human whose insights were proving uncomfortably accurate. Emma was studying him with the same methodical attention he had been trained to apply to his subjects, and her conclusions were bringing her closer to truths that could endanger not only his mission, but his life. As winter deepened and their daily interactions continued to develop in complexity and intimacy, Caleb began to understand that he was facing a choice that no amount of advanced training had prepared him for. He could maintain his emotional distance and professional detachment, preserving his mission at the cost of losing the most meaningful relationship he had ever experienced, or he could allow their connection to deepen, knowing that doing so would inevitably lead to discoveries that could destroy everything he had built. The decision was complicated by the growing realization that Emma was experiencing similar conflicts regarding their relationship. She had accepted employment as his housekeeper and cook, but their interactions had evolved far beyond the simple employer-employee relationship that both had initially expected. There were moments when Caleb caught her watching him with an expression that suggested feelings that went well beyond professional respect, and conversations that carried undercurrents of attraction and affection that neither was quite ready to acknowledge directly. The situation became more complex when visitors arrived at the ranch in late January, a federal marshal and his deputy investigating reports of unusual phenomena in the territory. Marshal Jake Wilson was an experienced lawman who had spent years dealing with frontier mysteries, and his questions about strange lights and unexplained occurrences in the area made it clear that Caleb's activities had attracted official attention. The investigation provided Emma with opportunities to observe Caleb under pressure, and his responses to the marshal's questions revealed aspects of his character that impressed her even as they raised new questions about his background. He answered truthfully when possible, deflected skillfully when necessary, and maintained calm authority even when facing implications that could threaten his freedom. Emma's support during this difficult period demonstrated loyalty and protectiveness that went well beyond her job responsibilities. She corroborated his accounts of ranch activities, provided the marshal and his deputy with hospitality that kept them comfortable while preventing them from conducting overly thorough investigations, and generally helped maintain the facade of normal ranch operations, despite the underlying tensions. Her actions during the marshal's visit made it clear that she had chosen to trust Caleb despite the mysteries surrounding him, and that her commitment to their household extended beyond simple employment to something more personal and enduring. The realization that she was willing to protect him even without understanding what she was protecting him from touched Caleb in ways that his training had never prepared him to handle. When the marshal finally departed, satisfied that whatever unusual phenomena had been reported were either natural occurrences or the products of overly imaginative witnesses, Emma and Caleb found themselves alone together in the kitchen, where they had shared so many conversations over the previous months. The crisis had passed, but it had also forced both of them to confront the depth of their feelings for each other. The conversation that followed was unlike any that Caleb had ever experienced, either in his years among humans or in his previous life among his own people. Emma spoke with quiet honesty about the affection and respect that had grown between them, acknowledging that their relationship had evolved far beyond its original parameters, while also expressing uncertainty about where it might lead. Caleb found himself responding with equal honesty, admitting that she had become more important to him than he had thought possible, while struggling to explain why complete openness about his background was impossible without revealing truths that could endanger them both. His words carried weight and sincerity that convinced Emma of his genuine care for her, even as they left many of her questions unanswered. Their first kiss happened naturally, without planning or dramatic declaration, as they stood together in the lamplight of the kitchen where they had shared so many meals and conversations. It was gentle and tentative, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been building for months, and it marked the beginning of a relationship that would challenge everything both of them thought they understood about love, trust, and the possibility of building a future together despite insurmountable obstacles. The months that followed brought a happiness to the ranch that was evident to everyone who visited. Emma and Caleb settled into patterns of domestic partnership that seemed natural despite their unconventional origins. The children thrived under their combined care. The ranch prospered under management that combined Caleb's mysterious expertise with Emma's practical organizational skills, and their personal relationship deepened into something that felt like the foundation for a permanent life together. But Caleb carried with him the constant awareness that their happiness was built on deceptions that would inevitably be discovered, and that when that discovery came, it would destroy everything they had created together. His communications with his superiors had become increasingly irregular, as he struggled to maintain his professional responsibilities while protecting the life he had built with Emma. The crisis came, as such crises always do, without warning and from an unexpected direction. Emma discovered Caleb's true nature not through careful investigation or dramatic revelation, but through simple accident when she witnessed one of his routine energy absorption sessions during a particularly intense lightning storm. She had been unable to sleep due to the weather and had gone to the kitchen to prepare warm milk for the children when she saw through the window what the ranch hands had witnessed months earlier: Caleb standing motionless in the storm, electricity flowing through him like water through a riverbed while he absorbed energy that should have killed any human being. Her reaction was not the fear or revulsion that Caleb might have expected, but rather a calm recognition that finally explained the mysteries she had been cataloging for months. When he returned to the house and found her waiting for him in the kitchen, she simply asked him to tell her the truth about what she had witnessed, making it clear that she was prepared to hear whatever explanation he could provide. The conversation that followed lasted until dawn and changed both their lives forever. Caleb told Emma as much of the truth as he dared, that he was not human, that he came from a place very far away, that he had been living among humans to study and understand their civilization, and that his feelings for her had compromised his mission in ways that could have serious consequences for both of them. Emma listened with the same practical intelligence she brought to every challenging situation, asking questions that revealed both her quick understanding of the implications and her concern for his safety rather than her own. Her acceptance of his alien nature was matter-of-fact rather than dramatic, as if she had already suspected something of the sort, and was simply having her theories confirmed. More importantly, she made it clear that his true nature did not change her feelings for him, and that she was willing to face whatever consequences might result from their relationship as long as they faced them together. Her courage and loyalty in the face of revelations that might have terrified or repulsed others demonstrated the strength of character that had originally attracted Caleb to her. Their wedding took place quietly in the ranch house parlor 6 months later, performed by the same traveling minister who had officiated at dozens of frontier ceremonies without ever suspecting that he was joining a human woman to a being from another world. Emma wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her figure, while Caleb wore his finest suit and promised to love and protect her for as long as they both lived. The vows they spoke carried special weight given the unusual circumstances of their union. Emma promised to love Caleb regardless of the mysteries that surrounded his past, or the challenges that might arise in their future. Caleb promised to choose Emma and their life together over any other loyalties or obligations that might compete for his commitment. Neither of them spoke of the risks they were taking or the difficulties that lay ahead, but both understood that their marriage represented a choice to build their future on love and trust, rather than safety and convention. They were creating something that had never existed before, a partnership between species that transcended the boundaries of what either of their civilizations considered possible. The years that followed brought both joy and challenges as Emma and Caleb learned to navigate marriage between species whose emotional and psychological patterns were not always compatible. Emma had to adapt to a husband whose abilities and knowledge far exceeded human norms, while Caleb had to learn to function as a human husband and father while maintaining enough of his true nature to survive. The children grew up seeing Caleb as their father in every way that mattered, and he found that raising human young provided insights into their species that decades of detached observation had never revealed. Teaching Johnny and Sarah about the world around them, watching them develop their own personalities and abilities, and providing them with the security and guidance they needed to become confident adults, gave Caleb a sense of purpose and fulfillment that his previous life of scientific observation had never offered. Emma proved to be not only a devoted wife, but also a valuable partner in managing the complexities of Caleb's double life. Her intelligence and intuition helped him navigate situations where his alien nature might have created suspicions, while her deep understanding of human social dynamics enabled them to build relationships within their community that provided both friendship and protection. Their marriage became a model for other couples in the territory, demonstrating the kind of partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection that created stable families and strong communities. What their neighbors could never know was that their example also proved something unprecedented in the history of both their species, that love could indeed transcend the barriers between worlds when it was built on understanding, acceptance, and daily choice rather than mere attraction or convenience. As decades passed and Emma aged while Caleb remained essentially unchanged, their relationship faced new challenges that tested their commitment in ways neither had anticipated. Emma's acceptance of his longevity was characteristic of the practical wisdom she brought to every aspect of their life together. She made it clear that she would rather have a few decades of marriage to an extraordinary being than a lifetime with someone ordinary. Their love story, which had begun with a simple arrangement for cooking and housekeeping, evolved into something that challenged the fundamental assumptions of both their civilizations about the nature of consciousness, emotion, and the possibilities for connection across the vast distances that separated intelligent species. Emma had given Caleb not just her heart, but also her trust, her courage, and her willingness to build a future on foundations that existed nowhere else in the universe. In return, Caleb had chosen to abandon his own people's detached perfection for the messy, complicated, ultimately more rewarding experience of human love. He discovered that the isolation and objectivity that his species prized as signs of advanced development were actually limitations that prevented them from understanding the deeper truths about existence that could only be learned through genuine connection with others. Their ranch became a refuge not only for them, but for others who needed second chances, new beginnings, or simply a place where they could be accepted for who they were, rather than judged by conventional standards. Emma's kitchen continued to serve as the heart of their home, where meals were occasions for connection and conversation, rather than mere nutrition, and where the love between two beings from different worlds created warmth that extended far beyond the boundaries of their own relationship. The story of how an alien cowboy had hired a cook for meals but found something infinitely more valuable became legend in the territory, though the full truth remained known only to the couple themselves. Their example inspired others to look beyond surface appearances and conventional expectations when seeking love and partnership, and their success proved that the most important connections could develop from the simplest beginnings, when hearts were open to unexpected possibilities. As Emma grew older, and their time together began to draw toward its inevitable close, neither regretted the choices that had brought them together, or the challenges they had faced in building their unconventional, but deeply satisfying marriage. They had created something unique in the universe, a love story that proved the barriers between worlds could be overcome when two beings were willing to choose each other over everything else their respective civilizations told them was important. In the quiet moments of their later years, sitting together on the porch of the ranch house where they had built their life, Emma and Caleb would sometimes reflect on the extraordinary journey that had brought them from employer and employee to partners in the deepest sense of the word. Their love had begun in a kitchen and been nourished by countless meals shared together, but it had grown into something that sustained not only their own spirits, but everyone whose lives they touched. The alien who had needed only meals had discovered that what he truly needed was the human heart that understood love as a choice made new each day, demonstrated through countless small acts of care and consideration, rather than grand gestures or dramatic declarations. The cook who had sought only employment and security had found in her unusual employer a love that transcended every boundary, except the willingness to see past differences to the deeper truths that connected all conscious beings seeking meaning and connection in an often lonely universe.